So I've been asked to talk about customer challenge groups, and as Nick said, they are an innovation. There's no question about this, and I think that's what's really attracted me to being involved in it, and a number of other people in different companies, because it's an opportunity to do something really very different. I guess the thing that's been really interesting for me is it's an opportunity to draw on work I've done in many other sectors, including financial services and communications and various other places, and kind of draw some threads from there and think about how they might apply in this space. And I remember when I was being interviewed, it was a kind of genuinely open process to find an independent chair for the Southern Water Customer Challenge Group, saying that I thought really this was an experiment in outsourced regulation, and I do believe that is actually what it is, if at the end of this process Ofwat do what they have promised to do, which is take proper account of what we do. So I think it's a potentially very powerful shift, but it is absolutely about innovation. So I'm going to try and catch up a bit of time, because I know you want to have some questions, and you know, if there's more here that you want to go back to, please do feel free when we come to questions. But I thought I wanted to just kind of start by trying to define what a consumer champion is. Customer challenge groups are consumer champions. This case, not sitting next to the regulator, but sitting next to the company. And a few things here which differentiate a customer champion or a consumer champion. And I guess the most significant is it starts and ends with the consumer. It starts with the consumer's experience, it starts with consumer evidence, it starts with the consumer in the round in respect of all their needs. And I think in thinking about this, we're not just talking about consumers as they buy or use commodities, we're talking about them in the wider sense of having broader public interests as well as that consumer experience. I'm going to talk about consumer rights in a minute and explain to you what they are. But very important, a consumer champion is independent and absolutely championing. And I want to pause on one thing that we're not. And I pause on this because actually in this we might, some of us disagree. I think some companies have, with their customer challenge groups, interpreted a customer challenge group as the forum within which to talk to customers. In other words, the engagement itself. I don't believe that. That's not the interpretation that I've adopted. I think the customer challenge group is about challenging the company to do really good engagement, not about being the space in which that engagement happens. But there are very many different models of customer challenge group, and they do stretch from a customer forum, if you like, to something which is much more like the one I'm going to describe to you. And I think we are at one end of the spectrum in the group that I've set up. So why do we need them at all? Also worth stopping on, and I think there are three really good reasons why we need consumer champions, actually, in lots of different sectors, not just in water. The first is because there's all sorts of reasons why consumers aren't the focus of people's decision making. There's issues around shareholder return, there's the regulatory requirements, there's a whole set of policy goals and ambitions. All of these these are voices that can shout loudly. There's a whole set of issues about the fact that actually consumers can't speak for themselves very often or don't have the same opportunities, and I think that's particularly the case, obviously, where you've got monopolies. That's going to change a bit in relation to business customers, particularly at the larger end, but for domestic customers it's not going to change for a long time. So we have no power. The information that we need in order to make decisions is really very complex in many cases, and financial services is a classic in that respect. There are lots of vulnerable people, minority interests, whose voices don't get heard if you do talk to customers, and they can often be forgotten. And I think the third thing is we get drowned out in the conversation. I wonder how many other consumer representatives there are in this room. One, thank you. So we are two in this room, and that is the way it is everywhere we go. And there are very many other voices that are very loud indeed, championing their own causes, and power to their elbow. I wouldn't wish to stop them, but I think that's one of the reasons why we sometimes need artificially to create a consumer voice to make sure that we've got that kind of a balance. So I imagine this will be pretty familiar to all of you. This is the way that Ofwat have it's a rather loose set of bullets around the way that Ofwat have described the customer challenge group role, but they do explicitly say it should be independent. They set out some membership requirements, which makes it a rather interesting phenomenon because it's partly about people who can be seen to bring various different customers' perspectives. It's also about having the other three regulators, not Ofwat, at the table, and CC Water, all of whom have different roles in this process, extra to the customer challenge group, so that makes it interesting to chair, I have to say. It's about taking a view about customer and stakeholder engagement, but also, very importantly, about the way that's reflected in the plan and the acceptability of the business plan. And as you will know, we write a report to Ofwat, which lands alongside the business plan, I hope a little less heavily than the business plan, but nevertheless lands alongside the business plan. And Ofwat are clear that they have said, and they have reiterated this in the methodology statement, that they plan to take some account of what the customer challenge groups have said in the way that they then assess the business plans. What they've also said in the methodology statement is it doesn't stop there. I think we might have thought it did, but it doesn't. So they're expecting the customer challenge groups to play a role in making representations to Ofwat, but also working very much facing the company during the period between draft and final determination on both the draft determination which Ofwat have issued and then the menu choices. So what have we done at Southern Water? Well, I guess, some of this is very process driven, but I think it's terribly important. And I think it's terribly important because I think if we want Ofwat to take this seriously, we have to be robust in this process. And so this is an exercise in setting this up in a robust way. So we've agreed a memorandum of understanding with the company, and we've done that particularly because the company need to know what to expect. And we need to know what to expect. We need to know what we can and can't do, what we're going to get from them. They need to know when they give us confidential information, and they do, that we're going to treat it with appropriate respect. So no surprises is pretty key here. I think it's also really important, and it's very much in that memorandum of understanding, that the customer challenge group is not doing any of this stuff. It's challenging the company to do it. And that has been quite difficult to establish because there are lots of people, even on our CCG, particularly from CC Water and the other regulators, who have been used to business planning processes in the past and who have been wont to think that actually we should be doing some of this stuff ourselves, and that's not what I think it's about. It absolutely requires board level engagement because this is an exercise in changing the company's mind and heart, and if you don't have a voice at the board, actually I don't think you're able to put your hand on your heart and say you've influenced the company in the way that you need to. So I go to the board probably on a quarterly basis, and I have a regular catch up with the chief exec and the chair. We've got a small high level group. Other people have got much bigger groups. I've only got 10 on our CCG, including the 4 statutory members, so 6, if you like, independents across the spectrum of interests. Because I think that's the way that you get really good discussion. It's like any board, if you like. If you have too many people, you can't ever really air the issues. 8 to 10 probably recognised as being about right. Very importantly, and I'm going to come onto a slide on this in a second, we felt it was really important at the outset that we were clear with the company how we were going to make an assessment of the business plan, the acceptability of the business plan. I don't want to arrive at the point a few weeks before our report is due to think, well, what am I going to say and how am I going to say it and how are we going to make this judgment about whether or not it's acceptable? So it has to be properly thought through. And actually, having worked out what the criteria are, we've said to the company, you do a self-assessment against the criteria we're giving you, and then we will take a look at that and see whether or not we think it's fit for purpose. So we're making them do quite a lot of work, actually, which is kind of part of that sense of commitment to doing all of this. I think it's hugely important that the whole of this process is traceable and transparent, and I'll say a word more about that in a second. And finally, at Southern, they've decided from the very outset that this is not about PR14, this is about their business. And I think that's so we'll come on to that in just a second in relation to the future of these groups. So in establishing the criteria for acceptability, we started with 8 consumer rights. They're internationally agreed, and very good genesis, John F. Kennedy, who can argue with that? And these in outline are, on the left-hand side, are the 8 consumer rights. They obviously don't, all of them fit perfectly in a water context, but they seem to me a very good place to start in terms of thinking whether or not the plan was going to be acceptable to consumers. So we worked with the company to develop a version of these which was fit for purpose for this particular task, and that's what you see on the left. And that will be the way that we make an assessment. It will be the way they produce their self-assessment to inform our discussion, and it will actually also be the way that we present our report to Ofwat. We can talk about that again in a minute if you're keen to explore it further. Just a word also about why traceability and transparency is important. I think for a practical purpose, if we don't have a record of this, actually I've already forgotten what we did at the beginning a year ago. We need to have it recorded so that we can report on it, because we will need to report on the entirety of the process in what we say to Ofwat to show that it was a robust process. There's something about communications as well, because it's not just the people who are in the room who come to our CCG meetings who need to know what we've said. There's something about the rest of the company hearing what we've said. It needs to filter through everything that they do, so it needs to be communicable in an appropriate format. There's something terribly important for me about being accountable. If we're doing this on behalf of consumers, I'm sure most of them aren't interested, but if we are doing it on behalf of all consumers, actually we need to show them that we've done it in an appropriate way. So we have a website where they can come and they can look and see what we're doing, and we record our minutes and so on. But perhaps the single most important reason for doing this in a transparent and traceable way is we need to prove to Ofwat that we've done it in a robust manner, and we need for them to be able to see all the stages in the process. So much for the way we've set it up. I was asked to just give a thought about what happened beyond the price review, and I think that depends on 2 groups of people really. As I said, Southern have been really clear that this is not just about PR14. This is about embedding learning in the organisation, about changing the culture, actually, of the organisation. And as I said in a bullet on an earlier slide, actually part of the ambition for a consumer champion is to put yourself out of work. I mean, it rarely happens, but it would be nice, wouldn't it, if we didn't any longer feel we need to have these kind of thorns in the flesh of companies and regulators saying, have you remembered about consumers? So it's very clear to me this is not just about the business plan, it's about the implementation of the business plan too. And I don't think the company will be done with the task by 2014. I'd be very surprised if any company was done with the task of embedding this new consumer focus within its organisation by 2014. And I think all the companies therefore have a choice. They could choose to do something similar, something a bit different with the CCG. Having had this experience in this business planning round, they could choose what to do with it themselves, regardless of what Ofwat do. I mean, Johnson Cox has said, as Regina have said time after time, it's up to you to decide what you want to do. This is an area where you could choose to do something, irrespective of what the regulator says. But the future of the CCGs, as they stand as a piece of outsourced regulation, really does depend on Ofwat, of course. And I would say that depends as much on whether Ofwat really does what they said they would do on the tin, and listens to what the CCGs do, say, or whether they choose to ignore it. But if it is genuinely followed through by Ofwat, then it could be a very powerful tool for the future. And there are some big challenges for Ofwat, because, as I say, we come in many shapes and forms, and they'll have to discriminate between the different CCG reports and take a view about whether we've all done our jobs as well as each other, or actually we've done them rather differently, and weigh them up in appropriate ways. And I think one of the things which we should ask them to do in this context is to evaluate the experiment. I mean, in relation to innovation, you don't innovate and then kind of just let it run endlessly. You innovate, you pilot, you test, you evaluate, and you decide whether you're going to make it business as usual. And I think there's an evaluation about the CCG process, which Ofwat really ought to be doing at the close of this process. But I do think there's been something very powerful about this last period of innovation, which is that there hasn't been a prescription for customer challenge groups, and actually I think that has let many flowers bloom. I don't know what colour, shade they're all going to be, how big they'll all be, but they are very different. There's no question about that, and it will be really interesting to see at the end how they work out.